assassination and a suspected chemical attack, both blamed on the same hardline rebel group in Idlib. Are they intentionally undermining the Syrian opposition? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Hayat Tahrir Al-sham. Russia has resumed bombing Syrian rebels for the first time since a de-escalation deal in September. The airstrikes followed a suspected chemical attack in the regime-held city of Aleppo, injuring more than 100 people. Russia and the Assad regime blamed the armed opposition in Idlib. The alliance of Turkish-backed rebels there deny the allegation, saying the regime is creating a pretext for an offensive. But Idlib's most powerful rebel group has stayed silent. Hayat Tahrir Al-sham, and it was territory that HTS controls that was hit by Russia. Once an Al-qaeda offshoot in Syria, HTS controls most of the last remaining rebel-held province. Last week, HTS was accused of gunning down 2 prominent opposition activists. Rights groups say they have a history of assassinating those who speak out against them. So, is HTS undermining the opposition to Syria's Bashar al-Assad? Randolph Nogel reports.
It's been 2 years since the rebels lost Aleppo, but the fog of war has still not cleared. Dozens of people in Syria's second-largest city, which is now controlled by the Assad regime, were sent to hospital asphyxiated after a suspected chlorine gas attack. The Assad regime and its ally Russia have accused opposition fighters in Idlib province of carrying out the attack. They've implicated Hayat Tahrir Al-sham, or HTS, which has roots in Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate, the Al-Nusra Front. It controls most of Syria's last remaining rebel stronghold. But no rebel group has ever been confirmed to have used chemical weapons. The UN says the regime has used chlorine and sarin gas multiple times throughout Syria's war, and Daesh has been found to have used sulfur mustard gas once. International investigators say they'll look into the incident.
We are going through a difficult moment. Nothing can be so difficult as impossible to be solved. We have this responsibility for attribution, and we are setting up the team for Syria, and we will see what is the way we carried out this new mandate.
But perhaps even more pressing is the need to preserve a fragile buffer zone agreement in Idlib. Following the gas attack, Russian fighter jets retaliated with airstrikes in Idlib's rebel-held de-escalation zone. The airstrikes violate a deal between Russia and Turkey reached in September that has so far prevented a regime offensive that would have likely displaced hundreds of thousands of people from the province.
The areas that were bombed are not inhabited, but they can be considered military areas. The people who live near these areas are starting to get scared. They wonder if the planes are going to come back to strike. Will people be killed again? Will people have to flee again like before?
The HTS has already defied a deadline to withdraw from Idlib. The group is also now suspected of carrying out the killings of 2 prominent Syrian activists. Raid Fares and Hamoud Junaid ran an opposition radio station that was critical of both the regime and HTS. But the broader fear is that HTS, which has vowed to fight to the end, could provide the catalyst for an all-out regime offensive. No group has claimed responsibility for the Aleppo attack, and for now, the buffer zone agreement in Idlib is holding. But these incidents underscore the volatility of a besieged region that's home to 3 million people, many of whom have already been displaced in Syria's 7-year war. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Yahya Al-Aridi. He's the spokesman for the Syrian Negotiation Commission. In Berlin is Fadel Abdulghani. He's the chairman and founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. And also in Berlin, we have Kevork Almasian. He's the founder of Syriana Analysis, an alternative Syrian news website. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Yahya Al-Aridi, is it clear to you that rebels, most likely HTS, Hayat Tahrir Al-sham, conducted that chemical attack which injured more than 100 people?
Well, Imran, we have to know facts about this particular situation. Russia has been talking about the use of chemical weapons or gas for the past few months by rebels. And the purpose for that is to tell the world, because the regime is under so much pressure regarding this particular file, that the rebels are the ones who are using chemical weapons. They themselves decided that the rebels did that, and it was done from that particular base, targeting that particular place, and immediately they started punishing or bombarding that particular point, and they investigated it, ready with a team and ready with a media team. Now, the purpose for that is to really abort or destroy or obstruct the Sochi Accord between Turkey and Russia.
But even if it does obstruct or abort, as you say, any semblance of peace or ceasefire, and even if they use it as an excuse to kick off again, right? It still doesn't make it untrue, right? It's quite possible that HTS got hold of chlorine. They're in that part of Idlib, close to Aleppo, and they launched it, and 100 people are injured. Why is that so difficult to believe?
Well, if al-Nusra did it, it would be certain agents who are planted by Russia or the regime.
But they're Al-qaeda. Do you really
Iran,
think
or Al-qaeda
they're incapable of
in
that?
order to abort this accord, because it hurts them. They live on tension. This is the point. They have been making a propaganda for the past few months that the rebels or the opposition or whatever are going to use gas.
But isn't it more likely that these are just really bad rebels that most people consider to be terrorists and nobody wants as a part of the future of Syria, and they've done a terrible thing?
We want to get rid of them. Syria wants to get rid of them before the regime itself, before Iran and before Russia. Because for Russia, for Iran, for the regime, they are providing the pretext depending on what they depend on in order to continue with this tension, in order to continue with their war, in order to continue with their control of Syria. So this is a situation the only party that benefits from is the regime and Iran.
Kevok Al-Masrian, these airstrikes, which are most likely to have been Russian, I mean, they have admitted to it, but you know, sometimes the language is kind of vague. Were they justified?
Actually, this is not the first time that there is a chemical incident in Syria. In the previous incidents, always the blame was on the government before any kind of solid investigation in this regard. This time, my call is for the OPCW to come underground in Aleppo and check whether or not the chemical weapon has been used and what kind of chemical materials were used this time. Actually, the Russian side was bombarding the HTS positions in coordination with the Turkish army, and the Turks were also positive with that, because the HTS, Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham, is not part of the Sochi Accord. It's not part of the Idlib deal, and it's supposed to be disarmed and supposed to be fought not only by the Russian side but also the Turkish side. Therefore, an attack that comes from the HTS controlled area on a government-held area, all fingers are pointed to the HTS, but until this moment, I call on the OPCW to come underground and investigate this case, because in the previous cases, for example, in Khan al-Assal in 2012, the first chemical incident that happened in Syria, the UN investigator Carla Del Bonte, she pointed out that the rebels used chemical weapons at that time, and when the investigators came to Syria in 2013, on the same night that the OPCW investigators arrived to Syria, there was another chemical attack just 10 kilometers away from the investigators in order to abort that mission. And that was successful, actually. In 2013, when the chemical attack happened in Ghouta, the the OPCW investigators couldn't go to Khan al-Assal because there was a newer case in Syria. So whether it is justified or not, any attack on HTS and ISIS is justified, not only according to the Syrian constitution, but according to the Sochi, according to the UN resolutions in this regard.
Okay, let me move this on slightly and bring in Fadil. Fadil Abdul Ghani, if it can be absolutely ascertained that HTS did this chemical attack and now it's bearing the brunt of the attacks from the Russians, and The whole prospect of Idlib is in question now, and whether that ceasefire is going to hold. Is HTS spoiling any potential for reconciliation, any potential for putting out this fire?
I don't know how we are fooling. All the reports is available online. We cannot throw words like this. Actually, this is actually shameful for the people. Actually, we are fooling people. Everyone knows very well that Carla De Ponte, when she said that the Commission of Inquiry announced, and they have statement that it's her own personality, and that's wrong. This is the first point. The second point is the Commission of Inquiry reports are and they are all available online. They condemned the regime by 13 times using the chemical weapons.
Okay.
This is the first
but
point.
Fadil,
the second point is
in this
that
instant,
OPCW.
In this instant, okay, so let's state as fact. Let's state as fact that in the past. Fadil, 1 second.
They don't
Fadil,
have
1 second. Let's state as fact that the regime has used chemical weapons in the past. Certainly. Let's state as fact that the regime has used chemical weapons in the past.
Incident,
but let's talk about this one. Now go ahead.
Yeah. Also, because I want to go back to Khan al-Assad. Khan al-Assad, the regime committed attack against his own people, and Khan al-Assad under his control, and the Commission of Inquiry investigate, and the report is available, and they accuse the regime by this attack, by his Air Force's plan. So that's very clear, and the report is available for everyone. This is then the third point. The launching of the chemical weapons is very complex. Complexity. The Al-Nusra didn't committed any chemical attacks in all of those years. Daesh or ISIS committed 2 attacks. All the remaining attacks is implemented by the regime. It's not easy, and for all time the regime is fighting the OPCW with the Russian. The Russian veto used 6 times against the chemical files in Syria. 15 days ago, they make here a vote in Hague against the ability for OPCW, and they are now calling them to investigate and to point out who is the perpetrator, and we are also enhancing this investigation and calling the OPCW to do this, and everyone will reveal that that this attack is, I'm sure, implemented by the regime, because Al-Nusra, I'm telling and I'm confirming, they don't have this ability. I'm not defending Al-Nusra. They are killing my friend Raed Fares.
Allow me to come in here, because we've got 2 other guests here. We have about 5 minutes left on this segment. I think both you and Kevok, you got there in a different way, but you both agree that the OPCW would be the best arbiter of what exactly happened there, and I'm glad that that is the case. Let me then slightly shift this and talk about Nusra, because Fadil, you say Nusra doesn't have the capability. HTS, Nusra, just for the sake of our viewers, sometimes these are used interchangeably. Al-qaeda, HTS, Nusra. Let's use HTS. Let me bring you in, Yahya Al-Aridi. At the same time, they're assassinating, most likely to have assassinated these 2 activists, such as Raed Fares, one of them as well. Now, again, we look at motive and we look at who benefits. The regime benefits, right? Raed Fares speaks out against the regime. That doesn't mean that HTS didn't kill him. It's quite likely that they killed him, right?
Well, there is a real intricacy there. Nusra says that it's against the regime. But in reality, whatever the Nusra has done so far is at the service of the regime. When when the regime and Iran in particular expressed their rejection of the Idlib Accord as a de-escalation area in Astana, Al-Nusra provided the pretext for them to obstruct this particular accord.
But it doesn't mean they're working with them, does it?
No, I believe
there's a symbiotic relationship, because the one action precipitates a reaction.
Exactly, they are coordinating with them because it's against them. They are living on tension, exactly the same as the regime and Iran. If there is no more tension in Syria, Iran would cease to have any particular plan or particular ambitions to continue with its project in Syria. Now, another thing. Now, if we think of what happened in Astana regarding the de-escalation area, Iran said that this particular agreement would not hold. And it threatened that it would obstruct it.
But maybe they just
Later
weren't
on,
being optimistic.
in
Maybe they just looked at
Sochi-
7 years of history and
Right.
said, well, maybe this isn't
In
great.
Sochi, Iran was not there. The accord was signed by Turkey and Russia. And Iran has a real interest. And through Al-qaeda, it has connection with al-Nusra. It provides them with the pretext they want. And this has continuously been the case. With Geneva, for instance, Imran, every round of Geneva, every round of Astana is punctuated by the regime and by Iran by a certain terrorist act that would divert attention from focusing on the political issue to the terrorist issue. And then Bashar al-Ja'fari would say, well, we have to fight terrorism.
How do you think
And when-
HTS would feel hearing you say that actually they're being manipulated by the Iranians and the
Not
regime?
manipulated, they are being implemented as people there who are providing them with a pretext in order to exploit everything, in order to obstruct everything. And they are constituting a real problem for the Russians. And now Russia, as I said earlier, have been talking about the use of chemical weapons. And who is spreading or disseminating this information about the use of chemical weapons? Nusra itself, Russia and Iran through their propaganda in the media. And then the only loser out of all this is the Syrian people, who are being the victims of the use of prohibited weapons, chemical weapons, and who are being the victims of everything. Nobody pays attention to them.
Kevok?
Actually, in the last minutes that we heard from your guest in Ankara or Istanbul, he was indirectly defending the HTS, mainly Al-qaeda, for the previous minutes, and then he says the HTS is the agent of the Syrian regime. Actually, in the last couple of weeks, HTS infiltrated several times into Syrian army positions, especially in northern Latakia and in northern Hama, and they killed over 25 Syrian soldiers. Only today, the Syrian army lost 3 soldiers in northern Latakia. So the HTS is not under real control, and nobody is able to control Al-qaeda in Idlib. And according to all resolutions, everybody should fight HTS. But until this moment, who is fighting HTS? Who is fighting on the ground? ISIS. It's the Syrian army, it's the Russian Air Force. Let's not fool ourselves by telling that Al-Nusra Front, sometimes it's a cute, moderate rebels, and sometimes it's a radical. We can't play this game. It's either a terrorist organization that could conduct any kind of terrorist attacks, including chemical attacks, or it's a rebel group that are saints and they are fighting against a dictatorship. We have to choose. We can't say this narrative and after 2 minutes we repeat another, we say another narrative. HTS is a terrorist organization. It holds a Wahhabi ideology, and Wahhabism comes from Saudi Arabia, doesn't come from Iran. So saying that HTS is an Iranian agent, it's really funny. I don't know if there is any sane person who is watching us can believe that Al-qaeda is an Iranian organization, because in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in Syria, in Iraq, including in Nigeria, it's Saudi Arabia supports this organization and not Iran.
Yahya, I'm going to give you a chance to respond very briefly and then give Fadil the final word. Yeah, Yahya, come in.
Well, nobody quarrels with the fact that Al-Nusra is a terrorist organization. Nobody quarrels with the fact that Al-qaeda is a terrorist organization. But at the same time, we have to take into consideration that the regime is using particular persons and infiltrating these particular organizations through Iran with good connections historically with Al-qaeda. They are providing with Iran and the regime with the pretext they want.
So you believe not because of ideology, but because of political expediency, they're using them to...
They are using them, exactly. This
enact
is the situation.
political ends on the
ground.
ground.
And at the same time, the regime doesn't care
But you don't have proof for that.
No, the regime doesn't care about losing 10,
I don't
20,
want to go
30,
through this debate
30,
between your...
30
One second, Fadil. 1 second, Fadil. Yes.
Because the regime is concerned about one particular thing, in just remaining in power.
Right.
Whatever it loses in terms of personnel or young men, Syrians over there, they don't care.
Okay.
But they are concerned mainly about remaining and sitting on that bloody chair all this time.
Okay, and that's where you and Kevok fundamentally disagree. Fadil, let me ask you to wrap us up, but fold into your response this answer. I want to ask you, is the Idlib deal under threat now? given everything we've seen over the past few days? Is the Idlib peace deal under threat?
Yes, of course, it's under threat. But first of all, I don't want to go through this argument at all between that is the regime portrayed al-Nusra or it's for... No. Let us see the goal. They are same. The regime is terrorist and HTS is terrorist group. They are both fighting and killing the civilized movement. They are both killing. The regime is killed Dr. Omar Arnouz, tortured thousands of our friends and colleagues. They are all their peaceful movement toward democracy. Al-Nusra is killed Raed al-Fariz and Hamoud Jnaid, and they are Raed also at the beginning, he is opposite the regime himself. So they are served at both the same goal. Regarding your question, of course, but who is we gonna to blame? One month ago, I visited DC and I spoke to the State Department, and I think this also responsibility for the Turkish government as well. We need to actually to invest this truth happened in Idlib in order to remove HTS and all of this extremist group. On contrary, those extremist group is expanded in this. They are using the benefit of this truth. So this is responsibility for the Turkish government or for the civilized country in order to support the local society again in Idlib, the local policemen, the local council, in order to defeat those extremists and remove them again. Now what we are noticing that HTS, they are expanding. They have ability in order to reach to our symbol like Raed and Hamoud, and they are of course totally accused by this terrorist assassination for our friends and colleagues, and they are destroying. They are the one who is removing the local policemen and local council. So this responsibility is coming on the shoulder on those civilized country to support the Syrian people. Otherwise, the extremists will expand, and then this will lead to the narrative of the regime and the Russian, and this will come to the very unfortunate result.
Okay, understood. According to the best available estimates, extremist groups possibly control up to 2/3 of Idlib right now. And this is not a good sign for anybody involved. More than 7 years on in this war. Gentlemen, I've got to move on to discuss India with some other guests, but for the moment, let me thank you, Yahya Al-Aridi, Fadl Abdul Ghani, and Kevok Al-Masyan. Thanks again for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come, Twitter's CEO visits India and inadvertently sparks an online war over the caste system. Has the platform helped spread hate speech or raise the plight of the poor? And Taiwan's ruling party loses big in local elections. Is it a win for China? Twitter went to India looking to boost business, but instead they created a wave of controversy over the country's caste system. CEO Jack Dorsey met stakeholders and posed for a photo with a poster denouncing oppression by upper caste Hindus known as Brahmins. Those of the lower status, Dalits, say they frequently face prejudice and abuse from Brahmins. But an apology from Twitter's India office hasn't stopped Brahmins from pursuing legal action against the firm for hate speech. So, who's in the right? That debate in a moment. But first, here's Sandra Gatman.
It was a routine visit by Twitter's boss to one of the social media giant's biggest markets. But CEO Jack Dorsey soon found himself at the center of a Twitter storm. After a closed-door meeting, one activist posted this group photo with Jack holding this poster featuring the hashtag #SmashBrahminical Patriarchy. It sparked a feud about India's caste system and whether the Brahmins, or upper classes, are to blame for discrimination against the poorest in society.
So if anybody gives you a hate poster, will you blindly showcase it? Hashtag Smash Brahminical Patriarchy is not hate-mongering. It is a call for ending the systemic disenfranchisement of caste, religious, and gender minorities.
Is this demonology of Brahmins by foreign breaking India forces acceptable? Is it hate speech?
Dalit women raise our voice on Twitter. We continue to be harassed for speaking our truth.
Twitter's India office later apologized.
I'm very sorry for this. It's not reflective of our views. We took a private photo with the gift just given to us. We should have been more thoughtful. Twitter strives to be an impartial platform for all. We failed to do that here, and we must do better to serve our customers in India.
But the statement didn't go down well with activists. They said Dorsey chose to pose with the poster, and Twitter gave them a green light to publish the photo. India's caste system is a centuries-old hierarchy based on Hindu teachings about reincarnation. Most Hindus believe you're born into a caste that's earned and inherited from a past life. There are 4 main castes. They range from Brahmins or priests down to the Shudra or labor class. Dalits are born outside of the caste system, classed as the lowest of the low. Discrimination against Dalits has been illegal since the 1950s, but they say an apartheid system still exists. Most of India's 200 million Dalits are forced into work like cleaning sewers, collecting bodies, and skinning cows. They're also victims of growing violence that critics say largely goes unpunished. Boys have been beaten for drinking out of a well. Other Dalits have been killed for sitting cross-legged in a temple. Caste-based crimes have increased 25% since 2010. And India's Prime Minister has spoken out.
Stop attacking my Dalit brothers. If you want to attack, attack me. If you want to shoot, shoot me. But spare my Dalit brothers.
But it's a call that's gone unheard. Last year, a Dalit rally was attacked by upper caste vigilantes, sparking a riot. This year, Dalit rights campaigners were arrested in multiple raids. Recent affirmative action programs have helped some Dalits out of poverty and into careers like engineering, education, even politics. India's president, Ram Nath Kovind, is a Dalit, although the role is largely ceremonial. Dalits have also found a voice online, with countless activists using social media to raise awareness. But nearly all of India's political parties have been accused of exploiting divisions, and there has been a backlash and resentment among Brahmins and the upper castes who accuse many Dalit activists of belonging to guerrilla or extremist groups. By appearing to take sides on the issue, have Jack Dorsey and Twitter exacerbated those tensions, or have they given a voice to the voiceless? Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
We're joined now by the Dalit activist who gave Jack Dorsey the poster. Sangapali Aruna is the executive director of Project Mukti, an NGO combating what they call caste apartheid. Sangapali, thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Tell me briefly the context within which you gave that poster to Jack and why you gave it to him.
So I was basically invited for this event because I had been working with the Dalit and minority communities here in India. And when I was invited, I wasn't sure what exactly this closed door meeting was all about. But once I went there, I came to know that they wanted to know that, what kind of threats and what kind of problems or challenges that women in India are facing on Twitter platform. So for me, as an activist, as a tech activist and as a Dalit activist, I and my friends have been working on bringing tech equity. So this poster was one of the messages that we wanted to take forward about smashing Brahminical patriarchy that not only exists on the ground, but also happens to be very much prevalent on these social media platforms. So I gifted this poster just to make the Twitter team understand what kinds of challenges we as minorities or marginalized communities face on these platforms.
And for those viewers who know nothing about who a Brahmin is, what Brahminical patriarchy is in your eyes, what is it and why do you need to smash it?
So, for viewers who don't know what Brahmin is, so our India has been divided into, Indian society has been divided into um, a social order, which has Brahmins on the top based on their intellect. What they call it, the people who created it. In the terms of Manu or the Brahma, it says that the people who are intellectual were born from the head, the brain of the Brahma. So that's the reason they have the authority to read the Vedas, or they had the authority to rule anybody, and they had sanctioned many rules and many rituals for the others. So they were close to divinity, and the rest of the people who were placed below this order, whether it is Kshatriyas or Vaishyas, they were also called Dvijas, who were born twice and had access to the divinity. But the people who were born below these three categories, which were called the Shudras, were not considered pure enough to be close to the divinity. They were mostly engaging in jobs which were like working in farms for the others, or working in their homes. So these were like not intellectual jobs which were considered by the others. So these categories were created by the Brahmins in order to have the topmost level only to them.
Right. And so in the long and the short of it, in the year 2018, in democratic India, the biggest democracy in the world, are Dalits at the bottom of the pile, if you like, treated terribly by Brahmins who are considered at the top of the pile?
So to make one point clear, I would say that Dalits were never featured into this category that I just mentioned.
They didn't
the
even
Brahmin,
qualify.
Kshatriyas.
Right.
Why? Yes. So they were called the Avarnas. So they were outside this caste system. So they were considered untouchables. So after a long fight by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, we were considered as equals in the constitution. So that is how we got education. We got access to schools, or whether it is to administration or in politics or anything. But considering that it's been only 57 years that we have got independence and we have got access to these resources. So for us, because we have got reservations, the affirmative actions that were given to us, because we were denied education, we were denied land, we were denied every resource that India had. We got education now, we got into schools, we got into colleges, but at the same time, the affirmative action is not being properly implemented in any of these fields. So you don't see any Chief Justice of India, heading at this moment. Understood. Or you don't see any, So all these topmost positions are still headed and had only the upper caste people all throughout.
Understood. Yes. Okay. And this is why I guess there's a perceived need for a protest. Let's broaden out the discussion now with Sankrant Sanu from Bengaluru, India. He's an author and columnist for Entrepreneur India magazine. And in San Francisco, we have Dalit activist Termori Sundararajan. Thanks both of you for joining us. Sankrant, so we heard some context and some background from Sangapali Aruna. This is a protest. This is an opportunity to give it to Jack Dorsey to engage with a provocative idea, perhaps, but it's punching up. It's punching up at power and patriarchy. Do you have a problem with it?
Well, I think the fact that they are having a protest and making their voice heard is absolutely fantastic. So I don't think anybody could have a problem with that. And just like any other society in the world, India has also had social inequality. So people who are working to break that barrier, I would definitely commend them. Now, the question about Jack himself holding up this poster, I do think is inappropriate. And it's mainly inappropriate because, Jack represents a corporation which is providing a social media platform in which a number of these debates can and should take place. So it's as if, he would go to Turkey and hold up a poster saying, smash Islamic patriarchy, or go to Rome and saying, smash church patriarchy. I mean, I think there are legitimate reasons why one could raise those issues, but I don't think it's appropriate for Jack to be holding up that poster.
Right. Twitter did a reversal, and in a way, this discussion, I don't want it to go down that road where we discuss whether kind of Twitter should have got involved, and they did their reversal and they said, we're sorry and so on, because we don't have a Twitter rep on the discussion. But Sankran, some people went so far as to say that this was incitement to violence. Do you share that view?
Well, it has definitely happened that there has been violence, both definitely against Dalits who have been the majority sufferer of it, but also there has been violence in the other direction. So choosing our words carefully are important. I'll give you one example. There was a person, Perrier, who was one of the inspirations for this anti-caste movement. And so he was asked, he said, why do you hate, the Brahmin or the Brahminism? My reply is the Brahmins, and it is the Brahmins who should be annihilated. And then he goes around and compares the Brahmins to Jews, saying just like Jews were clever and they held on to resources, similarly Brahmins should be annihilated. Right. So this kind of language has been used by hate groups, and it has been used to physically target people as well.
Right.
So I think it's important that we choose that carefully and make sure that our cause is being further than not an incitement to hate.
Yeah, there's an interesting subplot here with the author Advaita Kala and politician Manish Tiwari claiming Brahmins are the sort of Jews of India, and that's been fascinating to follow. Termori, let me bring you in here because you designed the poster. So let me go right down to the source. When you designed the poster, what did you want to come out of it? What does smashing the Brahmin patriarchy mean?
Well, I think that, I just want to be very clear. There's only the most cynical interpretation that would allow for the discussion of a system of oppression to be seen as a slur against a community. It is an accepted practice with feminist movements around the world that when we want to talk about gender-based violence, we talk about the intersectional, interlocking systems of oppression that contribute to that. In India, you cannot talk about what is the violence that women are facing without talking about caste, because caste is one of the longest systems of oppression that have been ongoing in the country. Every hour, 3 Dalits are murdered, 2 are raped, and 2 houses are burnt. There's violence on both sides in terms of this argument. Dalits did not write or create the scripture that determined the caste system. Dalits do not benefit from the privileges of caste. And in fact, we are dealing with an ongoing system of violence and atrocity that is not spoken about outside of Indian borders because of this culture of impunity. This is why I made that poster, because for people who are interested in the issues and the human rights problems within the Indian context, we need to have pieces of art that help create empathy and bridges to the battles of Dalits and other caste-oppressed faiths who are talking about their experiences of violence, not just on corporate platforms, but in real-life contexts as well. And you have to keep in mind that in the context of the Modi administration, we have seen an instrumental rise of atrocities against Dalits, Muslims, and Christians, and that has been embedded by a culture of violence and a culture of trolling on these platforms. And I think it's a real dangerous thing for Twitter to have gone down the tangent of this faux caste scandal, as opposed to focusing on what the real issue at hand, which is the issue of online safety and that of Indian minority and women and journalists who are saying the culture of violence has to stop. And when we are seeing the kinds of troll attacks that we are seeing in the Indian context, it is unprecedented. Right. In the last month alone, we have seen the BBC, we've seen the Embassy of Sweden, and we've seen Twitter all be targets of the same kind of violence that Dalit women are the canaries in the coal mine for. Right. And it has to be dealt with structurally. And I think the big problem, which Sangapali raised in her meeting, is right now Twitter has no way to account for caste violence on its platform because it doesn't allow for the reporting of caste.
Right.
So I'm not really going to dignify whether or not it is oppressive for a Dalit to talk about the system of oppression. I want to get to the source of the problem so we can make the atrocity stop.
Well, and that's a healthy reminder that the very reason Jack held that meeting was because he was speaking with women who receive abuse online. Sankrant, Termori makes a very compelling argument. Are you inclined to side with her?
I think her argument would be better if she didn't resort to exaggeration. For instance, she calls BBC as a target of violence. Now, what exactly was the story with the BBC? BBC put up a report. There was a counter argument. Another portal pointed out factual errors in the report. And now if that is turned into a narrative of violence, we have a real problem because we are saying any debate or free speech can now be turned into violence. And what that does is actually take away from real problems. It takes away from the real problems that
I would argue that there is a real problem here.
Let me just finish.
No, I would argue that when we're seeing journalists murdered, we're seeing journalists murdered. Because of hate speech on the platform, when we see Gauri Lankesh murdered from Bangalore, where you are based, because of the hate speech that we're seeing, we do have a real problem. There is real violence. This is why the women who met in that meeting were talking about not fictional violence. They were talking about rape threats. They were talking about death threats. And we have seen the resignation of 3 editors from 3 major news outlets in India from this violence. This is not fiction. This is reality.
So,
and we're not talking about it in a structural way where the platform is actually taking accountability for the hate speech and disinformation that is happening on the platform.
Okay, so Sankrant, it's not just words. Go ahead, Sankrant. It's not just words. People are being killed.
If you have to remember, India is a very, very large country. In fact, India's population is bigger than all of the continents, either one of the continents other than Asia. So it's 1.3 billion people. So when you hold up a statistic like 1 person is killed here, that doesn't give you the context of what's happening and what is happening. And I think social media has actually encouraged this. Social media has encouraged a vibrant debate of many, many different sides. And yes, when I write, I get trolled. There's certainly, women who are standing up, let's say, for a Hindu cause that get trolled, or people who are writing trolled. So there is trolling across the place. But I think it's unfair to characterize it as one. I mean, I could give you a whole list of violent incidents, for instance, where
fair enough, Sankrant. And I apologize if I have to interrupt you here, but we are out of time. Sangapali, we started off the discussion with you, and I want to end it with you. You top and tail us here. Let's bring it all together. Let's circle back to the beginning. Is this all going to make a difference? We're having this discussion on an international network coming out of Istanbul now to the entire English-speaking world. Is a difference going to be made by having this discussion?
Right. So for us, the basic thing is about talking about these platforms which have been existing on this society for almost like more than 10 years, and they have never actually thought of addressing caste as one of the criteria to be reported. So many of the cases have gone missing because we couldn't actually report these cases on these platforms. So if these platforms have been playing a major role in perpetrating violence by not listening to the voices that are actually being affected by this violence online, I believe that this conversation should at least trigger, and at least Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter listen to these conversations and try to address the hate speech and disinformation that are being targeted towards our communities on everyday basis. And for this matter, I had actually deleted my account 2 years back, both on Facebook and Twitter, because the violence did not stay on these platforms, but it actually was perpetrated as a physical violence who came back to me on my campus and then questioned me, and there was a physical argument. So in order to survive, in order to save my own self and also the movement, I had to quit. So this comes from my own experience that I'm talking. And when I put this forward in front of whether it was Facebook or Twitter, it was basically not for myself, but for our communities, which are being a target on everyday basis, and not just targeted, but actually being lynched based on the disinformation.
Okay. Listen, Sangapali, Sankrant and Termuri, it's been fascinating talking to all of you. I have to move on, unfortunately, but I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Firstly, I am taking full responsibility for the setbacks of this election. I am resigning from my post as chairwoman of the Democratic Progressive Party. Our efforts weren't enough, and we let down all our supporters who fought with us. I want to express our most sincere apologies.
Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party suffered a major defeat in Saturday's local elections, losing key cities to the opposition. The defeat has worried many DPP supporters and caused President Tsai Ing-wen, as you heard, to step down as party leader. The Kuomintang, or KMT, is the former ruling party that supports better relations with Beijing. And their victory has major implications for cross-strait relations and for ties between China and the US. So, did the DPP's tough stance towards China backfire, or were voters motivated by fear? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Melissa Newcomb. She's the project manager at the National Bureau of Asian Research. And in New York, we have Victor Gao. He's the chairman of the International Committee of Beijing Private Equity Association. I thank you both for joining us. Melissa, did the DPP essentially make it all about China in their campaign, and that backfired because in the end, China won and they lost?
Hi, so good to be here again today. Thank you for your question. I think that this spinning of the question of whether or not the DPP made it all about China is a little misguided because these were local elections. It's true that China definitely ran a pressure campaign against the Tsai administration from day one. But I don't think it's fair to say that people at the local level voting for their mayors and their county level representatives were thinking about China necessarily. They were thinking about their daily lives. They were thinking about their economy in their city. They were thinking about their schools and their wages. They weren't talking about China at that point in this type of election.
Victor Gao, undoubtedly, China was watching these elections closely. It must be thrilled by the results.
Well, first of all, the people in Taiwan did vote, and the verdict is out. KMT, which now has more than 60 to 70% of the local government leadership roles, and DPP just suffered a reversal of their fortune. They now held only on to about 20%. So the verdict is very clear. Indeed, it's a local election. It's for the mayors and the county administrators, etc. However, I think the people in Taiwan demonstrated again, they care about life, they care about living standard, they care about moving and improving their living standards. And this is exactly what Taiwan needs, whether at the national level eventually, or this time at the local government level. I think China is happy about the result because it's in the mega trend. People in Taiwan want to have peace and stability and better living standards, and President Tsai steered the course in the wrong direction, and the people wanted to demonstrate their true intentions this time.
Okay, so Melissa, even if it was about the economy and the local mayors and who picks up the trash and bread and milk, did it also, underlying everything, did it also signal that the people have less of an appetite to be antagonistic towards Beijing, less of an appetite to want to have complete, cemented independence and separatism?
I don't know if we can say this was a vote that showed the Taiwanese people want to be closer to the mainland China. I think we can say this is a vote that showed that the Taiwanese people were not happy with the DPP. They were not happy with the status quo in their daily lives. I think that if there was pressure from the mainland on people's lives, and they may have reacted to that. But I don't think we can really say the winner is China in this election. The winner was KMT, unfortunately, for the DPP, and people were not happy with the DPP. But I don't think we can really say that they want to be with the mainland, that they're anti-independence. I think people are pro-prosperity and pro-autonomy in Taiwan.
And so, Melissa, for President Tsai Ing-wen, moving forward, as we look at the big elections, that come up in a couple years' time.
Mm-hmm.
Has she been severely weakened? Is it going to be very difficult for her to stay in power?
She has been weakened, that's for sure. And I think what's come to light are the deep fractures within the DPP. It's clear that she's been trying to hold the center between the older, more conservative, socially conservative, pro-independence, deep green DPP members and the younger, liberal, sunflower movement generation. And she hasn't really been able to hold that center. That's a tough job to ask, to be honest. But is she still able to come back in 2020? I think so. Ma Ying-jeou stepped down as chair of the KMT when they lost elections. I think in the 2010. I could be wrong about that, I'm sorry. And he came back and won for his second presidential term. So it's still possible that she could win, but she does have an uphill battle within her party.
So Victor Gao, a KMT led locally, I guess not nationally, but locally, a KMT-led Taiwan for now, and possibly KMT-led Taiwan in 2020 and beyond. What does that mean for Beijing? Does it mean getting closer to the inevitability that Taiwan will just be swallowed up eventually and be a part of China?
Now I think all eyes are on the presidential election in 2020 in 2 years' time. And I think if we use today's result in Taiwan as an indication of what might happen in 2 years' time, definitely the people in Taiwan won. And the people clearly made a choice. They want to have peace, stability, greater prosperity. They do not want to have an antagonistic relation with mainland China. They do not want to become victims of any war or any geopolitical warmongering between China and the United States, for example. They really want to have a greater stability going forward. For Beijing, there is no greater desire than to have peace and stability in Taiwan, and there is no greater demand than better relations between mainland China and Taiwan, and people in Taiwan enjoying better living standards. This is truly a very firm rebuttal of whatever President Tsai Ing-wen and her close followers in DPP have preached over the past 2 years. And this is very positive from mainland China's perspective. We do not want to have a war with the compatriots in Taiwan. We want to have peace and greater cooperation with our brothers and sisters in Taiwan. And we really want to seek eventual peaceful reunification between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, which will be better for everyone in China and in Taiwan.
Right. Melissa, very finally, anything in these elections that would make Washington want to rethink its relationship with Taiwan or recalibrate some of it?
No, I think that this is a perfect example of how the relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan is stable, in the sense that the U.S. can see that Taiwan is having peaceful transfers of power between parties. And when we see that from Washington, we think that means this democracy is stable. There is no election violence. There were no riots in the streets. There was nothing violent happening after the elections. It was a stable transfer of power that everyone agreed on. The elections were fair. There may be some cases of disinformation or interference from the mainland. It's not clear yet. They are investigating that, of course. But at this point, we think that this is good for Taiwan to have a stable democracy.
Okay, Melissa Newcomb and Victor Gao, thanks for joining us once again on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gata. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Ukraine declares martial law after the Russian Navy seizes 3 of their ships. Are the two nations approaching the brink of war? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.